The Reid motion is still the pending matter, and if the Republicans then are determined to filibuster against it and not allow us to vote on it, they, I believe, will see the wrath of this country brought down upon them.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I'd be happy to.
So I just want to make sure that the people listening to you, you're such an expert on what goes on around here, that they get this and make sure that I get this too. What the senator is saying is that when 1 o'clock in the morning comes, we're going to have a vote to determine whether or not we can stop debating the Reid amendment and actually vote on it. If we don't get the 60 votes to do that, what has happened is they've just stalled us, but the Reid amendment is still pending, and we can get a vote on that unless the Republicans filibuster it and keep talking and talking and don't let us get to a vote. Is that correct?
The senator from California is exactly right.
Well, thank you, because I think this is important for the people to understand. And I would hope that Senator Reid will keep his amendment on the floor. It is the last vehicle standing to avert a default. And I thank my colleague for yielding.
And I thank the senator from California for reinforcing that point. I heard one of our colleagues tonight say that the Republicans are willing to give us a vote on this bill. No, they're not. Republicans are willing to have a cloture vote brought up earlier. They then will vote against cloture, but that will do nothing in terms of bringing us closer to a vote on the Reid amendment. Because if they will not end debate by voting yes for cloture, if they're going to filibuster, which apparently they're going to do, they're determined to filibuster this bill, all that happens if we don't get the 60 votes the first time that cloture is voted on is that it will be voted on again and again because they're filibustering. The Republicans would then be filibustering against our being able to vote on this bill. And everyone should be very clear on this. I hope the public will understand what is happening. The Republicans are not willing to give us a vote on the Reid amendment or on the Reid motion. They are not willing to do that. We'd be happy to have a vote on the Reid motion immediately. What they insist upon is that we get a supermajority to vote. They want to succeed in a filibuster without even filibustering. And that's something which is not only not within the Senate rules, it is also inconsistent with making progress on resolving this problem. The American people want us to compromise, and the refusal to compromise by a few members of this body and by a number of members of the other body is what is stymieing this resolution. And we cannot tolerate that, and I think what we must do is continue to offer to compromise. The Majority Leader is in his office, as he has been all day, waiting to hear from the Republican leader with any suggestions that he wishes to make in amendments to the Majority Leader's motion. It's been a long wait. It's been a fruitless wait, waiting for the Republican leader to suggest modifications. If it's not enough that the Reid motion already accepts the Republican arguments, no revenue, the cuts have to equal the amount of the increase in the debt limit. Those are key demands of the Republicans. I have a great deal of trouble not including revenues. I think it is an outrage that there is not shared sacrifice in this bill, that the wealthiest among us are still paying the reduced tax rate, for instance, that President Bush proposed, that we have loopholes in the law which give incentives to businesses to move jobs overseas, that we have hedge fund managers that are actually paying a lower tax rate on their very large incomes than their own employees pay on lesser incomes because of a loophole in the law. The American people want us to close these loopholes. And I have great trouble that there is no shared sacrifice in the proposal before us. But that's the way it is. It only has spending cuts. So the Republicans have gotten that, only spending cuts. They've gotten their argument also that the amount of any increase in the debt limit be matched by spending cuts. It's now time to say yes or to propose an alternative, and I yield the floor.
From Alabama.
Mr. President, I think it's become very clear that the Democratic colleagues want to raise taxes. They use the phrase revenues. Revenues, we need to share sacrifice. That means people need to pay more taxes. And as if that doesn't have an impact on the economy that we have, a recent study by one of the international groups found that the United States has the most progressive tax system in the world among the developed nations. This is all the European nations. The wealthy pay more in the United States than in those countries, according to an independent international study. And you've heard the numbers, what a substantial percentage of the income taxes are paid by the top 10% in America. I mean, how much more do you do this? And so I don't think, and I thought we had an agreement just last December with the President in which we agreed that raising taxes in a time of economic danger is not the right thing. Not doing something to fix this debt limit now is not a good thing. We need to raise the debt limit. I don't know what would happen if we don't. I don't think it would be good. I think it runs a risk. But the real danger we have is not the debt limit. The real danger we have is the extraordinary surging debt that this nation has, and it's unlike anything we've ever had before. It's systemic. It's part of the structure of the American economy right now that we're spending 42% more than we take in. You cannot keep doing that. And the projections for the future are not better. So it's a very dangerous, dangerous trend, and we've got to get off of it. So we had a talk about that in the last election. The American people were engaged in that. They weren't happy with their Congress. They didn't think Congress was managing their affairs very well. They felt they weren't listening to them when they were asking questions about how can you keep doing this? You're making our grandchildren, putting them in the poorhouse. You're risking the economy of the United States. All you want to do is spend money, buy votes, and say you're spreading the wealth around, and this is going to make things better. So we had an election, and it was a shellacking for the big spenders. Wasn't that what it was all about? Was there a single candidate that I know of that won last time, at least a new candidate that got elected for the first time, that didn't talk about the need to constrain spending in Washington? That was a theme throughout the election. That was the meaning of the election. So now my colleagues, we can't, you want to cut spending? They've got these extremists in the House. They don't want to play ball. They hadn't served in the Congress long enough. They don't know better. They think we can actually cut spending. Of course we can't cut spending. That's not the way you do it. You just reduce growth a little bit in spending and say you're cutting spending, even though it's still going up. That's what's been going on here. That's why we are increasing the debt at the most extraordinary rate and over a systemic period of time to a degree that every economist that's appeared before the Budget Committee, I'm the ranking Republican on it, everyone that's testified has told us you have got to stop. This is unsustainable. Unsustainable. You cannot keep doing this. Do you know, colleagues, that in the last 2 years, when the Democratic majority in this Senate was 60 votes, that spending for non-defense discretionary spending, not counting the stimulus, just the basic budgetary spending on all our accounts, non-war, non-defense, non-Social Security, went up 24% at a time we were running the biggest deficits in history. 24% increases, and we can't cut spending. And there was an article in the Washington Times yesterday, or day before. My colleague, Senator Shelby from Alabama, asked the Secretary of Education how he could explain that the Secretary of Education and the President were proposing that the Department of Education get a 13.5% increase for next fiscal year, beginning October 1st. 13.5%, and he defended that. And he said he was justified. It was an investment. But when you don't have money, you have to change business. You can't continue to be in denial and pretend that this is normal, that we can just continue to increase Education Department by 13.5%. By the way, the Department of Energy, the President proposes, and their Secretary defends, a 9.5% increase for the Department of Energy, which does more to restrict the production of energy than produce the source of energy in America. The Department of State, 10.5%. I'm talking about their proposal for next year, beginning October 1st of this year, the fiscal year. 60% increase they propose for transportation. And they propose a tax for that, but won't say what it is when I ask. But it won't be a gas tax because that's not popular, you know. So I asked Secretary LaHood, so it's a not gas tax. Is that right, Mr. Secretary? Well, we'll talk with Congress about what that tax is. But I can just tell you, Mr. LaHood, Congress is not going to pass a big fat tax. So you can increase spending on your budget 60% because we don't have that kind of money. And we don't need to be hammering this fragile economy with another big tax increase. Besides, what we need to do first and foremost is rein in this surging spending spree we've been on. That's what we need to do. That's just a fact. That's what the American people understand. And I'm offended, frankly, by the suggestion that the people in the House who swept out a lot of the buddies of the big spenders in the Senate, a lot of the big spenders in the House are back home pushing, figuratively, up daisies. And because they were held to account, finally, many of them after many years in the Congress. They were voted out of office. So the people that beat them are extremists, you see. That's what they like to say. They won't negotiate. They won't deal. They're irresponsible. They actually think they can come up here and change the trajectory of debt in this country. So they passed a budget in the House of Representatives. Brilliant, fine, young Congressman Paul Ryan, chairman of the Budget Committee in the House, the Republican majority in the House, and they passed a budget that cut spending $5 trillion. And it would change the debt trajectory of America. It didn't quite balance even at 10 years. I would like to have seen it, but we're in such a hole, it is hard to get out. But it would have made a big change in where we were going, put us on the right path. Senator Reid called it up, mocked it, had his members all vote against it. So we said, what about your budget, Mr. Reid? Well, we don't have one. Well, what about your budget? You've got the majority in the Senate. You can pass a budget with just 50 votes. Why don't you pass a budget? It's foolish to pass a budget, he said. Foolish to pass a budget. At a time when this country has never, ever been in a more serious financial condition than we are today. We are borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar we spend. That's a deep hole. And it's not because it's not the war. We spent $150+ billion on the war this year. Next year will be 118. The deficit this year will be $1,500 billion. It's about 10%. If you put every bit of the war cost as part of our debt, it's only 10%. It's other spending that's putting us in this hole. And we do have long-term problems with our entitlement programs. And shouldn't we talk about them? Or should we do as the President did, bring Congressman Ryan over to the White House for a speech, sit him right down there in the front of him, and then launch into an attack on what he and his members of the House had tried to do to make America a better place. So they say those guys over there and the new women that were elected, they're not reasonable enough. They won't work with us. Let me tell you, they proposed a $6 trillion reduction. Even that didn't balance in 10 years, but it sure was a big step forward. You know what they've done now? The House passed a bill at the insistence of the Senate and the President to try to pass a bill, and they passed it, that would raise the debt ceiling and cut spending only $1 trillion. Is that an extremist thing to do? And they sent it over here. Much of it's very similar to what Senator Reid has proposed. And they called it up within minutes and tabled it without debate, without discussion. And then they continue to say, as if nothing happened, that these are extremists over here. And they won't listen to reason. And these Tea Party people are not good for America. But I'm going to tell you one thing. The Tea Party people understand an important fact. This Congress is spending too much money. They are exactly correct in that regard. No member of the United States Congress can with clear conscience look their constituents in the eye and say we have managed their money wisely. That we're in such a shape we can't even see when we will balance the budget because we've mismanaged their economy so badly. And the only idea that anybody seems to have around here is spend more money and stimulate the economy. And if you spend more money, where does it come from? It's borrowed because we're already in debt. And every new dime we spend is borrowed. There's only one way to move out of this, and that's to reduce spending. It just is. And the American people understand that. I recently had the honor to be in Estonia, up there near Russia, one of the Baltic nations that are so proud to be free and independent. When the recession hit, they suffered more than we. They had a 15% reduction in their economy. You know what they did? The cabinet members took a 40% pay cut. Every employee in Estonia took a 10 to 20% pay cut. One of the members told me, he said, I tell you who's really mad is my wife. She's a doctor. And the medical system got cut. And you know what? They had 5% growth first quarter. And their debt to GDP is 7%. Our debt to GDP is 95%. They're going to come out of this. And they're not going to have a debt so heavy that it pulls down the economy. Mr. President, I don't know what the agreement time-wise is at this point. Can the chair advise me?
The Republican time has expired, Senator.
All right. I see my colleague from California now will yield. I would just note that the idea that that the Republicans don't want to vote is not correct. We're prepared to vote. We're prepared to vote on the standard procedural matter in the Senate of 60 votes. It's done on every significant matter around here, and that's perfectly normal. And I'm rather amazed, surprised, and almost amused that my colleagues would feign such great pain and anguish that this would occur. They would do exactly the same. That's the way the Senate operates. That's the way they've operated when they were in the minority, and that's the way we operate today. And on matters of significance, it takes 60 votes. So, Mr. President, I thank the Chair for the opportunity to speak. I'm just raising some political points here. We've been jousting politically, some of which is good and some of which is not. I do say we need to reach an agreement soon and pass legislation that will raise the debt limit and will reduce our spending trajectory so that we can get this country on a sound path. I thank the Chair. Will yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from California.
Mr. President, my friend Senator Sessions has said that Republicans are prepared to vote on the Reid proposal. Actually, they're not. They want to vote on whether to allow a vote on the Reid proposal. That's what a cloture vote is. And they don't want to vote on the Reid proposal. We have offered that and said that a majority should rule. Just like the Boehner proposal passed in the House with a simple majority, we want a chance to pass the Reid proposal with a simple majority. Now, my friend says that's laughable. Why is it laughable? We went back and looked at the record, Mr. President, and every vote we can find on increasing the debt was always done by a simple majority. Always. So if you want to follow tradition, cut out the filibuster, let us vote, and we will pass the Reid proposal tonight. And we can find a way to resolve these problems. My colleague also said Democrats want to raise taxes. Let me just say something. Democrats want to reduce taxes on the middle class, but we do believe that multinational corporations, people who earn over $1 billion a year and $1 million a year should pay their fair share. We do believe that. Senator Sanders researched and found out that the richest 400 families in America make more than 1/2 of America. Can you imagine? The richest 400 families make more than half of America. So those at the top are doing just fine. So let's be clear. We want an up or down vote on the Reid amendment. We think it is fair. We think it is just. We marched toward the Republicans. We didn't want to give up on revenues, but we did. We wanted a clean debt ceiling, not holding it hostage to any machinations. We gave that up. We're willing to talk. We're willing to work. Senator Reid's office, I was just in there. The door is wide open, waiting for Republicans to come in there and work with us. So we hope at this point we will have an agreement and we can climb down off this man-made crisis. There's no crisis. 89 times we've raised the debt, no crisis whatsoever. And now I think it's important that we recognize that this is no crisis. We have a challenge to reduce deficits and debt. We did it with Bill Clinton. We balanced the budget. We created surpluses. We know how to do it. We'll work with you and do it. But we don't need a man-made crisis to pull this entire economy down, to lower the full faith and credit of the United States. Imagine holding the full faith and credit of the United States hostage until you get every single thing you want. That is not compromise. That is absolutely irresponsible. So, Mr. President, I want to thank you for your leadership in pointing out what's happening here on the floor, that there is a filibuster to stop us from voting on the Reid Amendment, and that we're not going to give up. If, in fact, they decide they want to continue to debate the Reid Amendment and they don't give us 60 votes to go to a vote on the Reid Amendment, we're going to keep going, because the Reid Amendment is a fair amendment. It pulled from both sides of the aisle. It will get us out of this mess that we're in and get us concentrating on the long-term challenges we face: job creation, deficits, and debt reduction. I would yield the floor, and I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will roll.
Mr. Akaka.
So the Senate tonight continues to debate a revised version of Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid's proposal, with a vote to move forward on the bill scheduled for about 1 a.m. Eastern Time. We have heard from NBC News political director Chuck Todd, who sent a tweet recently, that there is some chatter that Senator Reid may decide to delay their cloture vote until noon tomorrow to give talks more time for both his bill and for negotiations between the White House and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. So that was in a tweet from Chuck Todd. Before the vote on Senator Reid's bill has even happened, the House earlier today voted the Reid measure down. Here's the vote breakdown on that. 173 Democrats in the House voted in favor of the Reid bill, with no Republicans voting in favor, and 235 Republicans and 11 Democrats voted against the Reid bill in the House.
Mr. Alexander.
Majority Leader.
House unanimous consent. Call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
First of all, Mr. President, I appreciate everyone's patience. One of the most difficult times we find in the history of our country. Mr. President, there are negotiations going on at the White House now on a solution that will avert a catastrophic default on the nation's debt. There are many elements to be finalized, and there's still a distance to go before any arrangement can be completed. But I believe we should give everyone as much room as possible to do their work. I've spoken to the White House quite a few times this evening. They've asked me to give everyone as much time as possible to reach an agreement, if one can be reached. For that reason, we'll hold over the vote until tomorrow at noon to give them more time to talk. In fact, we'll come in at noon and have the vote at 1 o'clock. I'm glad to see this move toward cooperation and compromise. I hope it bears fruit. I'm confident that a final agreement that will adopt the Senate's long-term approach rather than the short-term Band-Aid proposed by the House of Representatives will move forward. There can be no short-term agreement, and I'm optimistic that there will be no short-term arrangement whatsoever. I'm also confident that reasonable people from both parties should be able to reach an agreement, and I believe we should give them time to do so. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the cloture vote on the Reid motion to concur in the House Amendment to S. 627 with Amendment number 589 occur tomorrow, Sunday, July 31st at 1 p.m. Further, that the mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Is there objection? Hearing none, it is so ordered.
Note the absent quorum.
Without it, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President,
Majority Leader.
I ask consent to call the call be terminated.
Without objection.
First of all, just take a minute with the presiding officer. It's not often that we see the distinguished chairman of our Armed Services Committee presiding. So it's glad to see you here. You still know how to do it. I would also say, just in passing, that the state of Michigan is so fortunate to have you and, frankly, your brother serving in Congress. And I don't think it would, I know there are lots of things that people want to talk about tonight, but I think it's worth saying, and my friend has heard me say it before. I was just making a decision whether or not I would run for the Senate. And I visited the senator from Michigan in his office. And I said, you know, I came to Washington and served with your brother, Sandra Levin. And you said that I'll never forget, I've reminded you of you a few times, yes, he's my brother, but also my best friend. So, Mr. President, I appreciate who you are and all you've done for our country. I now ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes the business day, adjourn until 12 p.m. on Sunday, July 31st. The following the prayer and the pledge. Journal proceedings be approved today. The morning hour be deemed expired. Time for 2 leaders be reserved for the use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, the Senate resumed consideration on the motion to concur in the House message accompanying S-627, the legislative vehicle for the debt limit increase, with the time until 1 p.m. equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or the designees.
Is there objection? Hearing none, it's so ordered.
The roll call vote on the motion and vote cloture on the motion to concur in the House message accompanying S-627 with the Reid amendment will occur approximately 1 p.m. tomorrow. And I would note, Mr. President, that if cloture is not invoked, the debate will continue on the Reid amendment. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Without objection, the Senate stands adjourned until noon tomorrow.
The Senate has been debating Senate Democratic leader Reid's plan to raise the debt ceiling. A vote to move the